Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg.
Great to be here.
And just a quick note before we start. This deep dive is generated with AI, but all the information we'll discuss today has been carefully verified using the sources provided.
Absolutely. Solid sourcing is key.
So this is the deep dive. We take sources, articles, reports, research, and, well, we pull out the most important insights to help you get informed, quickly, and thoroughly.
And today we're diving into a concept that has really stirred things up in international affairs.
That's right, the responsibility to protect, or R2P as it's usually called.
Yeah, it sits right at that tricky intersection, doesn't it? International relations, international law, and, the big one, state sovereignty.
Definitely. We've got quite a range of sources here, academic articles, things from the European Journal of International Law.
And reports, too, from groups like the Crisis Group, and importantly, the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty, the ICIS.
Okay, so our mission today is really to unpack R2P. Where did this idea come from? How does it wrestle with older ideas like sovereignty or even humanitarian intervention?
And crucially, how has it actually played out?
Right.
We need to look at the real-world cases. The successes, sure, but also the failures.
Yeah, and let's face it, the messy politics involved.
Exactly. We'll explore how that post-Cold War period, especially after some, horrific events in the 90s.
Like Rwanda.
Precisely. How moral arguments started gaining more traction, really challenging that old hands-off approach, the non-intervention principle.
Which ultimately led to R2P and this idea of fundamentally rethinking sovereignty itself. Okay, let's get into it.
Well, the sources really stress that the end of the Cold War was a pivot point. The ideological standoff was over, and suddenly there was more space for moral arguments. Human rights talk became much more prominent.
Right, sparking these debates about, how do you weigh human rights against traditional state interests? Non-intervention versus doing something.
Yeah, and thinkers like Michael Walzer, his work on just and unjust wars, that became quite influential around then. People were grappling with these ideas.
But even with this growing moral consciousness and existing international law, the 1990s were just brutal. They showed the system's limits, didn't they?
Tragically, yes. Mass atrocities unfolded, and Rwanda in '94 is the devastating example everyone points to in the sources. An estimated 1 million Tutsis killed in 3 months.
It's almost unimaginable, and it just forced this question onto the international community. What should we have done? What could we have done?
Exactly. That failure, that collective inaction, put immense pressure on the status quo. Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General at the time, he directly challenged everyone.
He laid it out, didn't he?
He did. Find a way, he said, to bridge this gap between the UN Charter's principle of non-intervention, that's Article 2, Paragraph 4, and the absolute moral need to respond when states are committing mass atrocities against their own people.
So how do you square that circle? Uphold sovereignty, but also protect people from their own governments. That was the challenge.
And that's what led Canada to step up and establish the ICAS, the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty, back in 2000.
Right, chaired by Gareth Evans and Mohamed Sahnoun. Their big report came out in 2001, The Responsibility to Protect, trying to build a new consensus.
And the core of it, the really groundbreaking part, was conceptual. It wasn't just tweaking the rules, it was rethinking the foundation.
How so?
Instead of just sovereignty meaning control a state's right to do what it wants within its borders, they proposed a necessary recharacterization.
Okay.
They talked about sovereignty as responsibility. This idea, partly inspired by Francis Deng's work on African conflicts, basically said, being sovereign isn't just a right, it's a job.
A responsibility.
Exactly. The primary responsibility to protect your population from the worst kinds of harm. That lies with the state itself. It's fundamental to its legitimacy.
That makes intuitive sense. The state's right there. It has the power, the local knowledge. But what if the state is the problem? What if it's the one doing the killing, or it's just collapsed and can't protect anyone?
That's the crucial second part of R2P. If a state is clearly unwilling or unable to stop the 4 specific atrocity crimes, we're talking genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity.
The big 4.
Yes. If the state fails that basic duty, then R2P says a residual responsibility, a fallback duty, shifts to the wider international community.
Ah, so that's where the non-intervention principle might give way.
In the specific extreme circumstances, yes. The international responsibility to protect can override non-intervention. according to the R2P doctrine.
So it's not just about charging in, it's a structured approach. The ICSR report laid out 3 pillars,
It
right?
did. Very deliberately structured.
Mm.
And they stressed the priority. Pillar 1, the most
Yeah.
important one, the responsibility to prevent.
Stop it before it starts.
Exactly. Address the root causes the political tensions, economic despair, social divisions, all the things that can fuel mass violence. The sources really emphasize early warning, early action.
Moving from just reacting to actually preventing.
Right, a culture of prevention is the phrase used, integrating it into policy, using tools like diplomacy, maybe incentives, or even targeted coercion like sanctions early on.
Prevention is ideal, obviously, but history shows us prevention doesn't always work. Crises happen. So pillar 2.
Pillar 2 is the responsibility to react, responding when prevention has failed and atrocities are happening or imminent.
And this can mean different things.
A whole range. It starts with specific measures under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, mediation, diplomacy, maybe fact-finding missions.
Okay.
But if these aren't enough, it can escalate to coercive measures under Chapter 7. That could mean sanctions, arms embargoes.
And potentially military force.
As a last resort, yes. Military intervention is possible under Pillar 2, but, and this is critical, only with the authorization of the UN Security Council.
Always the Security Council.
Okay.
And then there's a third pillar for after the immediate crisis.
Yes, the responsibility to rebuild. This is vital. You can't just intervene and leave. Rebuilding is about helping the society recover, reconstruct, reconcile.
So things like security, justice.
Exactly. Providing security, setting up accountability for past crimes, supporting development, helping rebuild institutions so the state can actually exercise its responsibility responsibly going forward. It's about long-term stability.
Okay, now this whole concept, especially Pillar 2, the potential for military intervention, it seems to run straight into that bedrock principle, state sovereignty.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's the central tension. State sovereignty, going back to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, ideas from thinkers like Baudin and Hobbes, it's the foundation.
Mutual recognition, non-interference, the right to govern yourself.
Right. Internal and external sovereignty. It's deeply embedded in international law.
And the UN Charter itself, Article 2.4, seems to explicitly forbid using force against a state's territory or independence. How does R2P square that?
This is where the legal mechanics get, well, quite detailed. Article 2.4 is there, yes. But then you have Article 2, paragraph 7.
What's this?
It says, nothing in the Charter allows the UN to intervene in purely domestic matters.
Oh.
Unless
Okay.
the Security Council decides, under Chapter 7, that the situation is actually a threat to international peace and security.
So the Security Council can effectively define a domestic crisis as an international threat.
Precisely. If they make that determination under Chapter 7, they unlock significant powers. Article 42 specifically allows them to authorize military action if non-military measures under Article 41 are judged inadequate.
So breaching sovereignty can be lawful, but only if the Security Council, acting under Chapter 7, says so because the situation threatens wider peace.
That's the legal pathway. It's why Sir Martin Gilbert was quoted in one source calling R2P the most significant adjustment to traditional sovereignty. It creates a conditional exception.
Okay, I see the legal logic. And is this why R2P advocates are usually careful to distinguish it from the older idea of humanitarian intervention?
Yes, very much so. That term, humanitarian intervention, was controversial, often seen as potentially justifying unilateral action, focused on the intervener's right to act.
Whereas R2P is framed differently.
It's framed around the responsibility owed to the population at risk. The focus is on the victims, and it's broader. Remember, pillars 1 and 3, prevention and rebuilding, not just the reaction part.
Right. It tries to move beyond that difficult debate, like the one after Kosovo in '99, where the intervention was called illegal but legitimate. R2P aimed for a clearer framework.
Exactly. A framework anchored in the UN system, specifically the Security Council for any use of force.
So the Security Council really holds the keys when it comes to R2P's most forceful element, Pillar 2.
In practice, yes. They are the gatekeepers for authorizing force. UNSC Resolution 1674 back in 2006 formally reaffirmed the R2P principles from the 2005 World Summit.
But the Council itself, it's not just a neutral body applying rules, is it? There's politics involved, a lot of politics.
That's the unavoidable reality. And the source of constant criticism. The five permanent members,
Yeah.
US, UK, France, Russia, China, they each have a veto,
Meaning any one of them can block action.
regardless of how bad the situation is or how clearly it meets the R2P criteria. Critics argue this means P5 national interests often trump humanitarian concerns. R2P gets applied selectively, or not at all, depending on the geopolitical calculus.
And the sources mention the P5 structure itself is seen as unrepresentative, especially of the global south.
That's another layer of criticism, yes.
Yeah.
That their interests don't align with many other member states.
And getting authorization is one thing. Acting on it is another. You need the actual capability, right?
Absolutely. Political gets you the resolution, maybe, but then you need the means. Military assets, logistics, the hard power, but also diplomatic muscle, economic tools, soft power.
And often there's a lack of will, even within regional groups.
That's highlighted as a challenge, yes. Plus, even when there is will and capability, UN missions, the typical vehicle for intervention, they can be incredibly slow to deploy. We're talking months sometimes when rapid action is needed.
So let's look at the track record. When we examine actual cases, how do these factors, the council, the veto, political will, capacity, regional cooperation, how do they actually interact? What makes R2P intervention more likely?
Well, looking across different cases, the sources suggest a couple of conditions seem key for the Security Council to actually implement R2P, especially the intervention aspect.
Okay, what are they?
1, either the state involved doesn't actively obstruct the intervention, or if they do, there's enough political will, usually from a P5 member or a strong coalition, to push past that obstruction.
And the second condition?
Effective cooperation between regional players, think the African Union, ECOWAS in West Africa, maybe the Arab League, and the UN Security Council itself. That coordination seems vital.
Can you give examples where things lined up relatively well?
Mali and Côte d'Ivoire are often mentioned. Situations where either the government welcomed help or obstruction was overcome, and regional bodies worked pretty effectively with the UNSC.
And Libya in 2011, that's often cited as the R2P case.
It is. There you had strong P5 interest, US, UK, France, really pushed, and crucial regional support from the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Arab League. That combination generated the political will for UNSC Resolution 1973, despite Gaddafi's resistance.
But Libya also became controversial later, didn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, others argued NATO overstepped the mandate, used R2P as a cover for regime change. That definitely created lasting distrust and made future consensus harder to achieve.
Okay, so what about the other side? Where have these conditions not been met, leading to less effective action or no action?
We see the opposite pattern in places like the DRC, Sudan, South Sudan, the Central African Republic. Often you had active government obstruction.
Right.
And crucially, cooperation between regional bodies like the AU and the Security Council was weak, sometimes even strained, with resistance to council involvement.
Which brings us right back to that core criticism, selectivity. Do these cases support the argument that R2P is applied based on P5 interests, not need?
The high-profile failures certainly fuel that argument powerfully. Syria is the most glaring example, isn't it?
Absolutely. A conflict raging since 2011, horrific casualties, millions displaced. It seems like a textbook R2P situation on paper.
The criteria are clearly met. Yet the Security Council has been completely deadlocked. Vetoes, primarily from Russia and China.
Why?
Great power politics, essentially. Russia and Iran backing Assad's government, the U.S. and European powers backing opposition groups. Competing strategic interests just paralyzed the council. R2P principles took a backseat.
One source mentioned a specific Chinese calculation.
Yes, Yan Kuetong's analysis suggests China's vetoes were influenced partly by their negative experience over Libya, feeling the mandate was abused, and also by their strategic alignment with Russia.
And it's not just about these huge geopolitical clashes, right? What about Bahrain?
That's another case critics point to, drawing on Aiden Hayhier's work. Allegations of serious abuses, potentially crimes against humanity, torture, unlawful imprisonment, yet R2P hasn't really been invoked.
And the argument is
That the strategic interests of key P5 members, namely the U.S. and UK, things like arms sales, military training relationships, the U.S. Fifth Fleet being based there, have effectively shielded Bahrain from R2P scrutiny. It reinforces the perception that interests, not just atrocities, drive the agenda.
okay, so Syria and Bahrain paint a pretty bleak picture of selectivity and paralysis. But was there ever a case where the international community did act quickly, maybe more on the prevention side, embodying R2P principles effectively?
The response to the post-election violence in Kenya in 2007-2008 is often held up as a more positive, albeit non-military example.
What happened there?
There was serious ethnic violence, real fears of mass atrocities, but the international response was notably swift and unified. The African Union took the lead, Kofi Annan mediated.
Backed by the UN and others.
Yes, supported by the Security Council, the EU, key states. It was seen as effective early diplomatic action, fitting within R2P's prevention and early reaction ideas. The key, according to sources, was that regional and international actors move fast and together.
So R2P isn't just about military force. That early, unified diplomatic push made a difference in Kenya.
It suggests that part of the framework can work when the conditions align, especially regional leadership and international consensus.
So after looking at the origins, the framework, the legal debates, and these challenging real-world cases, where does that leave R2P now? What's the state of play?
Well, the fundamental tension hasn't gone away. R2P tries to elevate human protection alongside sovereignty. It offers a framework for action when states fail catastrophically.
But it has to operate in the real world, within the existing international system dominated by sovereign states and the Security Council's power politics.
Exactly. So has it fundamentally changed things? Or is it, a noble ideal often sidelined by cold, hard interests?
What do the sources suggest?
It seems to be a bit of both, really. Rhetorically, R2P has definitely shifted the conversation. There's now an established norm, a language, about a state's responsibility to its people and the international community's role when that fails.
So it's raised awareness, set a standard.
Yes, but its practical application, especially military intervention under Pillar 2, remains heavily dependent on political will within the Security Council, particularly the P5. That hasn't changed.
And those challenges we talked about, the inconsistent will, the lack of rapid response capabilities, the clash between national interests and this idea of universal responsibility, they persist.
Absolutely. They are ongoing obstacles. This whole push towards what some call practical morality in international relations, with R2P as a prime example, it has real political consequences. It constantly redraws the lines between realism and moralism.
It's challenging those traditional state-first views.
Right. It's part of that ongoing evolution in how we think about international order and responsibility.
Okay. We've really dug into the responsibility to protect today. Again, its origins in the shadow of terrible failures.
Explored its ambitious three-pillar framework, trying to balance sovereignty with protection.
And confronted the very real, very difficult challenges it faces when it meets international politics, great power dynamics, and national interest.
Yeah, it's an attempt to address humanity's worst impulses, but it's inevitably tangled up in the structures of international law and the often unpredictable power plays at the UN.
And as we've discussed, its success seems so contingent on factors like regional support and, critically, that political alignment among the most powerful states, leading to these frustrating questions about selectivity. So here's something to think about. Does the crucial promise of R2P, the goal of preventing mass atrocities, does that promise still hold weight despite the inconsistencies and the risks of its selective application? Or does that persistent gap, the one between the ideal R2P and the often disappointing reality, ultimately undermine its power to make a difference globally?
A tough question, something to definitely keep in mind as you follow current events. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Yes, thank you. If you found this deep dive valuable, please do follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if you enjoyed our exploration today, maybe consider leaving a 5-star rating. Your support really helps us reach more people who want to be well informed.